Beneath the lively streets of Camden Town, with its bustling markets and music venues, lies a hidden world of tunnels that once served as a vital refuge during the Second World War, originally constructed as part of early expansions of the London Underground. The disused tunnels near Camden Town Station were repurposed during the Blitz into deep bomb shelters capable of housing thousands of people. When German bombs rained down night after night in 1940 and 1941, Londoners sought safety wherever they could find it, and the government, anticipating the need for mass protection, identified abandoned or unfinished underground works as perfect candidates for conversion. Camden Town's tunnels, lying far below the surface and already reinforced by thick walls of concrete and steel, provided an ideal stronghold against the Luftwaffe's destruction. Families descended narrow staircases carrying blankets, ration tins, and precious keepsakes, finding themselves in long, dimly lit passageways that echoed with the murmur of hundreds of voices. The walls were lined with tiered bunks, stacked 3 high, while makeshift canteens served tea and bread to the shelter. For many, this underground refuge was both a sanctuary and a prison, safe from falling bombs, yet cut off from the world above, with stale air and constant dampness weighing on every breath. Still, within these tunnels, communities formed. Neighbors who might rarely have spoken in daylight found themselves sharing bunks and stories in the half-light, united by the common goal of survival. Children played in the shadows while parents whispered anxiously about relatives on the surface. The Camden Town shelters became a microcosm of wartime London, crowded, tense, but also resilient. To those who used them, the tunnels represented not just escape from death, but a stubborn defiance of the enemy's attempt to break the spirit of the city. While other shelters like those at Clapham or Stockwell are better remembered, Camden Town's hidden refuge was just as vital. A reminder that beneath the music and markets of modern Camden lies a forgotten battlefield of endurance, where ordinary Londoners faced the terror of the Blitz not with panic but with quiet strength. The conversion of Camden Town's disused tunnels into bomb shelters was a feat of rapid wartime engineering and improvisation. Once the government decided to adapt the unused spaces, teams of workers descended into the dust and darkness to make the tunnels habitable for thousands of people. Thick wooden bunks were installed along the curved walls, rising 3 tiers high and stretching the length of the passages, each one allocated to a family or individual for the duration of the Blitz. The shelters were fitted with chemical toilets at regular intervals, separated by thin partitions that afforded little privacy but were essential in the cramped underground environment. Ventilation shafts were added to draw in fresh air, though the atmosphere remained heavy and damp, filled with the smell of sweat, smoke, and cooking from makeshift canteens. Lighting was basic rows of electric bulbs strung along the ceilings, provided a dim yellow glow that cast long shadows and often flickered when the power fluctuated during raids. A small infirmary was set up to treat injuries, coughs, and colds that spread quickly in the close quarters, while volunteer nurses and wardens moved through the tunnels keeping order. Food was rationed, but canteens offered hot tea, bread, and the occasional stew prepared in large vats, bringing some comfort to those spending night after night underground. Families arrived carrying bundles of bedding, gas masks, and treasured belongings, setting up their bunks with whatever touches of home they could manage, photographs pinned to the walls, children's toys tucked into corners, blankets hung for a semblance of privacy. At full capacity, the shelter was a bustling underground village, alive with the sounds of children playing, adults chatting quietly, and the ever-present rumble of war above, muffled by tons of concrete. Though conditions were far from comfortable, the Camden Town tunnels provided something priceless, the assurance of survival. To step inside was to trade the terror of falling bombs for the uneasy safety of the subterranean world. For many Londoners, these nights in the tunnels became a routine, a strange rhythm of life where fear was tempered by resilience and where ordinary people endured extraordinary circumstances beneath the streets they called home. Daily life in the Camden Town tunnels developed its own strange rhythm, a mixture of hardship, routine, and unexpected moments of normality. Families descended into the shelter in the late afternoon or evening when the threat of bombing was most likely, often carrying children half asleep in their arms, along with blankets, ration bags, and a few personal treasures. Once inside, the tunnels filled with the hum of voices as people settled into their bunks, creating makeshift homes out of narrow wooden frames. Mothers tried to keep children occupied with games, songs, or improvised toys, while fathers read newspapers by the dim yellow light, scanning the headlines for news of raids or of the distant battlefront. Volunteers kept order, patrolling the corridors, organizing queues for the canteen, or distributing information about air raid warnings. For many, the hardest part was the lack of privacy. Whole families slept shoulder to shoulder with strangers, separated only by a blanket or a curtain draped between bunks. The noise was constant: babies crying, people coughing in the damp air, snatches of laughter, and the occasional echo of arguments born of stress and fatigue. Yet, despite the discomfort, a sense of community often emerged. Neighbors shared food, strangers exchanged stories, and friendships formed in the most unlikely of circumstances. Canteens provided tea and basic meals, while musicians or storytellers sometimes entertained groups of children, turning fear into a temporary kind of play. As the night wore on, the shelter grew quieter, though never completely silent. The distant thuds of bombs falling above were sometimes audible, the ground faintly trembling as explosions rocked the streets overhead. In those moments, people gripped their blankets tighter, whispering prayers or clinging to loved ones, comforted only by the knowledge that the tons of earth and concrete above them offered protection. When dawn came, families climbed back to the surface, blinking in the sunlight, often stepping into streets scarred by craters, rubble, and smoldering fires. Yet the routine continued: work, school, and daily chores during the day, followed by another descent underground at night. In this way, Camden Town's tunnels became more than just shelters. They were temporary homes in which Londoners forged resilience and found companionship. Even in the darkest of times, one of the defining features of the Camden Town tunnels as bomb shelters was the extraordinary level of organization and discipline required to keep thousands of people safe underground. While the shelters were designed to offer protection from falling bombs, they also had to function as self-contained communities where order was essential. Air raid precaution, ARP wardens and volunteer marshals oversaw the daily operations, ensuring that entrances and exits were clear, that stairways were not overcrowded, and that everyone knew where to go during emergencies. Strict rules were in place to manage the use of bunks, toilets, and canteen facilities, and any breach could quickly lead to chaos in such confined spaces. Signs painted along the walls directed people to latrines, first aid points, and water stations, while loudspeakers occasionally delivered instructions or updates. Lighting was kept on throughout the night, dim enough to conserve power but bright enough to allow wardens to monitor the crowd. Infirmary staff, often Red Cross volunteers, tended to those who fell ill, while stretcher-bearers stood ready in case bombs above caused collapses or injured civilians had to be brought down from the surface. The tunnels had to balance safety with morale, and so efforts were made to create a sense of normality despite the grim conditions. Posters with patriotic slogans decorated the walls, while notices informed shelterers of local events or civil defense news. At times, makeshift concerts or sing-alongs were organized, lifting spirits and distracting people from the thunder of bombs above. Children received special attention, with volunteers leading games or telling stories to keep them calm during the long, tense hours. The shelter was not immune to conflict. Arguments flared over cramped sleeping arrangements or food shortages, but wardens were trained to diffuse tensions quickly. Despite the challenges, the Camden Town tunnels operated smoothly enough to save countless lives. Their orderly structure contrasted with the chaos on the streets above, offering Londoners not just physical safety but also psychological reassurance that they were not alone. The discipline, resilience, and cooperation forged in these tunnels reflected the wider spirit of wartime London, a determination to endure together, no matter how long the nights of bombing might last. One of the defining features of the Camden Town tunnels as bomb shelters was the extraordinary level of organization and discipline required to keep thousands of people safe underground. While the shelters were designed to offer protection from falling bombs, they also had to function as self-contained communities where order was essential. Air raid precaution, ARP wardens and volunteer marshals oversaw the daily operations, ensuring that entrances and exits were clear, that stairways were not overcrowded, and that everyone knew where to go during emergencies. Strict rules were in place to manage the use of bunks, toilets, and canteen facilities, and any breach could quickly lead to chaos in such confined spaces. Signs painted along the walls directed people to latrines, first aid points, and water stations, while loudspeakers occasionally delivered instructions or updates. Lighting was kept on throughout the night, dim enough to conserve power but bright enough to allow wardens to monitor the crowd. Infirmary staff, often Red Cross volunteers, tended to those who fell ill, while stretcher-bearers stood ready in case bombs above caused collapses or injured civilians had to be brought down from the surface. The tunnels had to balance safety with morale, and so efforts were made to create a sense of normality despite the grim conditions. Posters with patriotic slogans decorated the walls, while notices informed shelterers of local events or civil defense news. At times, makeshift concerts or sing-alongs were organized, lifting spirits and distracting people from the thunder of bombs above. Children received special attention, with volunteers leading games or telling stories to keep them calm during the long, tense hours. The shelter was not immune to conflict. Arguments flared over cramped sleeping arrangements or food shortages, but wardens were trained to diffuse tensions quickly. Despite the challenges, the Camden Town tunnels operated smoothly enough to save countless lives. Their orderly structure contrasted with the chaos on the streets above, offering Londoners not just physical safety but also psychological reassurance that they were not alone. The discipline, resilience, and cooperation forged in these tunnels reflected the wider spirit of wartime London, a determination to endure together, no matter how long the nights of bombing might last. By the height of the Blitz in 1940-41, the Camden Town tunnels had become a lifeline for thousands, and the atmosphere inside during heavy raids was unforgettable. When the wail of air raid sirens echoed across London, families rushed down staircases and into the tunnels, carrying children, bundles of bedding, and treasured possessions. Within minutes, the shelter filled with the sound of hurried footsteps, anxious voices, and the steady bark of wardens directing people to their bunks. As the bombing intensified above, the tunnels transformed into a strange underground world where fear and resilience collided. The distant but unmistakable boom of explosions could often be heard through the earth, accompanied by faint vibrations that rattled the walls and caused dust to fall from the ceiling. In those moments, silence would fall over the shelter, punctuated only by the cries of children or the whispered reassurances of parents. People clutched one another, waiting for the thunder to subside, comforted by the knowledge that the concrete and earth surrounding them offered protection that brick houses above could not. The atmosphere was tense, yet also oddly communal. Families huddled together with strangers, sharing food, blankets, and whispered conversations to distract from the terror outside. At times, the lights flickered, adding to the sense of unease, and the stale air seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. Yet even in these conditions, moments of courage and kindness shone through. A volunteer leading a sing-along to calm frightened children, a nurse tending to an elderly man's breathing difficulties, or neighbors pooling rations so everyone had something warm to eat. Above ground, Camden Town shook under the onslaught of bombs, with fires raging and buildings collapsing. Below, in the tunnels, people endured in stoic silence, waiting for the all-clear signal that would allow them to return to the surface. Emerging at dawn often brought shock, familiar streets reduced to rubble, homes gone, shops destroyed. But the tunnels had done their job. They had saved lives. For those who sheltered there, Camden Town's underground passages became symbols of survival, places where ordinary Londoners faced the worst nights of the Blitz with extraordinary resilience and solidarity. Compared to some of London's larger deep-level shelters, such as those at Clapham South or Stockwell, the Camden Town tunnels were smaller and more modest in scale, but they shared the same essential purpose: survival. All of these deep shelters were built or adapted to house thousands of people, yet each developed its own atmosphere and character. Clapham South, for example, was vast enough to host entire communities, complete with libraries, churches, and organized recreation, while Stockwell became famous for its murals and community spirit. Camden Town's tunnels, by contrast, were narrower and more utilitarian, lacking the space for elaborate amenities. Instead, they embodied the stripped-down reality of wartime sheltering: rows of bunks, dim lighting, canteens serving tea, and the constant murmur of crowded humanity. Yet in many ways, the smaller scale made Camden Town feel more personal. Families became familiar with their neighbors after repeated nights underground. Friendships formed in close quarters, and wardens knew many shelterers by name. What Camden lacked in grandeur, it made up for in intimacy. The comparison also highlights how London's shelter system was a patchwork of improvisations, from grand subterranean refuges to converted tube tunnels and church basements. Camden's tunnels fit squarely into this mosaic, serving a vital local population that might otherwise have had nowhere safe to go. The experience of sheltering there reflected the broader wartime spirit of endurance and adaptability. People made do with what was available, turning bare tunnels into places of refuge and even, in fleeting moments, comfort. while other shelters attracted press attention or became symbols of post-war community pride. Camden Town remained quietly functional, serving its purpose without fanfare. Its importance lay not in headlines but in the countless lives preserved night after night, and in the memory of ordinary people who knew that beneath their neighborhood lay a sanctuary against destruction. In retrospect, Camden's shelters remind us that not every wartime refuge was grand or celebrated. Many were humble, improvised, and unremarkable in appearance, yet they carried the same weight of survival. The Camden Town tunnels may not have been the most famous, but they were every bit as essential to the fabric of London's resistance during the Blitz. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Camden Town tunnels, like so many of London's deep shelters, faced an uncertain future. Their original role as sanctuaries from bombs had ended, but the structures themselves remained intact, the labyrinth of reinforced passages beneath the streets. For a time, they were left largely dormant, their bunks, canteens, and toilets standing as ghostly reminders of nights spent hiding from destruction. Yet post-war Britain faced enormous challenges: housing shortages, rationing, and the urgent need to rebuild a battered city. In some cases, deep shelters were used for temporary accommodation, hosting families who had lost homes to bombing or migrants arriving to help rebuild the capital. Camden Town's tunnels, however, were more often repurposed for practical needs. Their size and security made them ideal for government storage, and at times they were filled with crates of documents, supplies, or equipment. During the early Cold War years, civil defense planners also considered them part of London's network of emergency refuges, though their limited size and facilities meant they were less favored than some of the larger shelters. Gradually, the tunnels faded from memory, hidden behind locked doors and anonymous surface buildings, known only to officials and a handful of locals who remembered their wartime use. Unlike places such as Clapham South, which later became famous for hosting Caribbean migrants from the Empire Windrush, Camden's tunnels never gained a second life as a vibrant community space. Instead, they slipped quietly into obscurity, overshadowed by Camden's post-war transformation into a cultural hub of markets, music, and art. Occasionally, urban explorers rediscovered the tunnels, fascinated by their peeling paint, abandoned bunks, and eerie silence. For them, the tunnels were not just relics of war but portals into a forgotten world where the echoes of the Blitz still lingered in the stale air. Today, the Camden Town bomb shelters are rarely mentioned in guidebooks or public histories, but they remain beneath the streets, a hidden testament to resilience. Though their wartime role was temporary, their survival reminds us that in the darkest of times, even the humblest spaces can become havens of life. Today, the Camden Town tunnels remain one of the lesser-known fragments of London's wartime story, overshadowed by the city's grander and better-preserved shelters. While places like Clapham South, Deep Shelter, have been partially opened to the public for tours, Camden's wartime refuges remain locked and hidden, their entrances disguised by anonymous surface buildings that thousands pass every day without a second glance. For most Londoners and visitors, the idea that beneath Camden's lively markets, pubs, and music venues lies a network of tunnels that once saved lives seems almost unimaginable. Yet, for those who sheltered there during the Blitz, the memory is indelible. Oral histories collected from survivors recall the smell of damp concrete, the flicker of the electric lights, the closeness of bunk beds, and the relief when the distant rumble of bombs was muffled by the thick walls. Some described the shelters as miserable and claustrophobic, while others remembered them as places of camaraderie and safety where friendships were forged in the shared struggle for survival. Historians point out that Camden's shelters reflect a larger truth about the Second World War, that much of the city's survival depended not on dramatic battles or famous leaders, but on the endurance of ordinary people in hidden spaces. Despite their importance, the Camden Town tunnels have not been widely celebrated or preserved. Their wartime fittings were long ago removed, and much of their story exists only in scattered documents and the fading memories of those who once descended into them night after night. Occasionally, urban explorers or local history enthusiasts bring attention to their existence, sharing rare photographs of crumbling staircases, rusting doors, and empty passageways. These glimpses into the forgotten tunnels stir fascination but also sadness, as they highlight how easily vital pieces of history can slip into obscurity. Still, the tunnels endure, quietly marking Camden's role in the wartime defense of London. They are part of the hidden city beneath the surface, out of sight, yet deeply entwined with the lives of those who survived because they existed. Remembering them today ensures that Camden's contribution to the spirit of wartime resilience is not entirely lost beneath the noise of modern life. Over time, the Camden Town tunnels have slipped not only into obscurity but also into the realm of folklore and urban legend. London has always been a city of hidden layers, and Camden's underground network has inspired speculation about secret uses and forgotten histories. Locals sometimes whisper that the tunnels were connected to other parts of the underground system, or that they housed military operations far beyond their intended role as shelters. While there is little evidence for such claims, the mystery surrounding sealed entrances and unmarked doors has fueled imaginations for decades. Some urban explorers have claimed to hear strange echoes or to feel an uncanny presence in the abandoned corridors, their minds perhaps haunted by the thought of the thousands who once slept there through nights of terror. In popular culture, Camden's tunnels occasionally surface as settings for ghost stories, thrillers, or speculative fiction, often portrayed as shadowy warrens hiding wartime secrets. Historians, however, emphasize the very real human drama that unfolded within them: the families who carried children down the stairwells, the wardens who enforced discipline, and the quiet endurance of people waiting in the dark for the alchemy. The contrast between folklore and history makes Camden Town's tunnels particularly compelling. They embody both the lived reality of survival and the mythic aura of the hidden city beneath London. Their anonymity in the present day only adds to this mystique. Unlike the well-publicized Churchill war rooms or the celebrated Clapham shelters, Camden's tunnels survive almost in silence, their entrances blending into the streetscape of shops and offices, offering no clue to the subterranean past below. This invisibility has allowed legends to grow, as people project their own narratives onto the unknown. For some, the tunnels symbolize resilience and endurance. For others, they are ghostly reminders of trauma buried in the city's foundations. Either way, Camden Town's bomb shelters occupy a unique place in London's memory, not fully remembered, not fully forgotten, but hovering between history and myth. In that liminal space, they continue to capture the imagination, reminders that beneath the city's energy and noise lie stories of fear, survival, and secrecy waiting to be rediscovered. The legacy of the Camden Town tunnels lies in their quiet testimony to London's resilience during the Second World War. While the city's history often highlights the heroism of fighter pilots or the strategies of leaders, the survival of ordinary citizens depended just as much on hidden spaces like these. Camden's shelters were part of a larger patchwork of defenses, ranging from purpose-built deep shelters to hastily converted basements, schools, and even church crypts. Together, they provided the psychological and physical shield that allowed Londoners to endure night after night of bombing. What makes Camden's story particularly powerful is its ordinariness. There was nothing glamorous about its damped corridors, flickering lights, or cramped bunks, yet it was precisely in such conditions that endurance was forged. For those who took refuge there, the tunnels became a symbol of both vulnerability and strength. Vulnerability, because they revealed how exposed civilians were to modern warfare, forced underground by the roar of enemy bombers. Strength, because they embodied the determination to survive, adapt, and continue daily life in the face of destruction. Today, as Camden Town thrives as one of London's cultural hubs, its markets and music venues draw millions who remain unaware of the shelters beneath their feet. Yet the existence of these tunnels adds another layer to Camden's identity. It is not only a place of creativity and commerce, but also a site of resilience and remembrance. Heritage advocates argue that these shelters should be preserved not merely as relics of war, but as living reminders of what ordinary people endured and overcame. They highlight the need to tell the stories of families who carried children down into the tunnels, of wardens who kept order, and of neighbors who built friendships in the most unlikely of places. In remembering the Camden Town bomb shelters, we also acknowledge the countless other hidden refuges across London that saved lives but rarely enter the spotlight of history. They remind us that resilience is not just a story of leaders and battles, but of communities enduring together in the shadows. Today, the Camden Town tunnels remain sealed and silent, yet their significance endures as part of London's hidden wartime heritage. They are not tourist attractions with polished exhibitions or restored interiors, but forgotten chambers that once cradled the lives of ordinary people in extraordinary times. Their story is one of quiet endurance, a reminder that history is not only made in grand halls of power or on famous battlefields, but also in the dimly lit bunkers where families huddled together, whispering prayers through the thunder of bombs. The tunnels embody the spirit of the Blitz in its most human form: the fear of destruction, the improvisation of survival, and the stubborn refusal to yield. Though little known today, their role was as vital as any other part of the city's shelter network, contributing to the survival of London as a whole. Each bed frame, each corridor, each painted sign pointing toward toilets or exits once bore witness to lives suspended between terror and hope. To forget them would be to forget the countless unnamed individuals whose resilience helped keep the city alive. Camden itself has transformed beyond recognition since those dark years, its streets now filled with vibrant markets, music, and creativity. Yet beneath this energy lies a hidden past, a layer of history that enriches the character of the place. Preserving the memory of Camden Town's tunnels does not require opening them to the public. It requires telling their story, acknowledging their role, and ensuring that they are not erased by the march of time. In their silence, they remind us that resilience is often invisible, built in the shadows by ordinary people whose courage rarely makes headlines. The Camden Town shelters, like so many others across London, stand as subterranean memorials to survival unseen but not forgotten. Their legacy continues each time we recall how, in the darkest nights of war, Londoners endured together in spaces carved beneath the city they refused to abandon. The Camden Town tunnels may lie hidden, but their story remains a vital chapter in the chronicle of London's endurance, a tribute to the quiet heroism of those who found shelter in their depths.